recommendations to the city on the finances and budget of the city of Scranton by HJA
Strategies, Mr. Henry Amoroso. In attendance on behalf of the city is Attorney Jason Shrive, City Solicitor, Mr. Dave Belzoni, Business Administrator, Mayor Bill Courtwright, and from HJA Strategies, Mr. Henry Amoroso and Mr. Evan Weiss. It should also be noted that members of the administration and staff are also present for this caucus. And it is open to you.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Council for having us here today. The report Henry's going to give you is work that he's done with his staff and members of my staff for the last 6 months. I don't think anybody here isn't aware of the fact that the city has some severe financial problems, and it's going to take some hard decisions to fix them. But I think my opinion is that's what we were elected for, to make these hard decisions. I think what you're going to find is there's going to be pain in order to fix the problems that the city has and to get us back on good financial footing. But I think we did a good job of spreading the pain as evenly as possible, and I hope that you will agree with me when you see that tonight in Henry's presentation. So I'll turn it over to Henry now.
Thank you very much, Council President. Thank you, members of the Council. I'd also like to, at this point, take a moment and thank the Chamber for the support that they provided. You will be receiving, through the Mayor's office, a full, complete report, some 70 pages or so. Tonight I'll be going through a PowerPoint presentation, of which you will also obviously be receiving. That report will supplement much of what I say this evening in greater detail, and of course we're here to answer any questions you have at any time. So thank you again for this opportunity. We very much enjoyed this engagement in Scranton, and have developed, and not surprisingly, an affection for your city, in large part because we see a solution, but we see a difficult solution. So it's always comforting for me with these types of engagements to be able to explain to the council, to the administration, to the citizens of the city that there is a solution, and one that does not have to be a continuing struggle on a year-to-year basis with your budget, that there are some difficult decisions ahead, and if you take those difficult decisions, we are confident that you will exit Act 47, that you will have a sustainable budget by 2017, coming into 2018, and that you will be able to build the type of surpluses and have the right ratios again in your budget planning. Should the city, however, fail or decide not to act decisively, the solution that the city faces is really one of two: property tax increases or EIT tax increases. That's what's in your toolbox. You are constrained to some extent by what the state provides. In order to balance what we think is a better than $14 million deficit by 2017, the only way you would be able to do it is to increase your property taxes by 119% over the 2013 levels to cover what we see as your 2017 deficit. This is $23 million in absolute terms. And if you didn't do that, some portion of it would have to be made up by a further resident EIT increase, which is already amongst the highest in the state. Cuts to the city's services, beyond those which we recommend this evening, would also be inevitable, and we believe the city would remain in Act 47, continuing to struggle with its cash flows, but more importantly, would likely be frozen out of the credit markets. To illustrate the situation as we see it, the turquoise line, the lower line, the deficit line, over 2013 to 2017 is roughly $14 million. In order for tax revenues to solve that problem, they would have to grow from a 2013 base of just under $20 million, roughly $20 million, to a base greater than $14.5 million in 2017. And as I said again, that would just simply really leave you treading water at that point. But let's begin to take a look at your actual budget and see if we can adjust it for what your real budget is in real terms when we take out some of the extraordinary activity. The budget you've all adopted is a $130 million budget. That $130 million budget includes the $22 million union judgment. It includes some other ins and outs as well, but that $22 million union judgment is the primary driver, and it's accounted for on a current basis because it has not yet been treated on any structured basis. So if, for example, it were converted to debt over an extended period of time, you would be treating the current portion of the debt in your upcoming budgets, and then you would be dealing just with that current portion on a going forward basis. So when we really adjust your budget, we adjust it down to roughly $99,500,000 is what we think what the true budget of the city is, what the true appropriation that you're dealing with. We think that's very clear. We're certain that other stakeholders, including Pell, agree with that number. So when we take a look at that and we apply it to what your 2014 budget is, we project in 2014 a $4.8 million deficit. So we believe your 2014 budget actually has a deficit built into it. The cash portion of that has been dealt with to some extent by having absorbed payments in the prior year that were budgeted for this year. So on a cash flow, on a cash basis, we think you're okay. However, in real terms, we believe you are running a $4.8 million budget deficit. Now let's take a look at what real estate tax millage is between 2006 and 2014. We think 2006 was probably the last time that it was a relatively healthy budget. And not surprisingly, the economy was far stronger. We had not incurred the effects of the recession. We had not seen the type of job loss that has hit some of the regions in which Scranton rests as hard as has been hit. So when we look at that, we see what's really happening is what was a relatively flat land millage and improvement millage has now began to accelerate, not in the improvement side, not surprisingly, but in the land side, because that's where the taxes are being made up to balance your budget. That's pretty much your 50% tax increase of last year. Now, in order to be fair and objective in this process, I think it's important to note that Scranton suffers, in my opinion, my professional opinion, from having not been the beneficiary of a reval in more than 4 decades. In my mind, it is singularly the most important thing that can be done immediately to create tax fairness and to remove the barrier of what such an out-of-whack assessment does to new construction and new opportunity. So if someone were to buy a new house or build a new house or invest in a building, they are paying at the highest end because there has not been a reval in the city's history. It's a disincentive. It's punishing to some extent. And in fact, using state data and working with Pell, just on state valuation data, and I should footnote this and caveat it to some extent, you don't know until you do a reval what the true values are, but using state data, for every dollar generated in real estate taxes today, Scranton could be getting $1.35 if there were a reassessment. Using state data, not my own modeling, simply state data. When we take a look at your budget, we start to break it down and say what drives the cost, where are the problems, and why, and how, and identifying those problems, they begin to speak to solutions. The proportion of the total appropriation that's comprised currently of employee expenses is between 60 and 63% of your current budget. So that is your direct employment payment, of which we're going to see the impact of these numbers in a short while, plus pension and health costs is 60 to 63% of your budget. Employee expenses grew by approximately 44% between 2006 and 2014. So in 8 years, a 44% increase in employee expenses. They are projected to grow to 66% by 2018. So by 2018, you will have had a 66% increase in these expenses. The city's earned income tax, the single largest source of revenue until 2014, when property taxes surpassed it, increased by just 24% between 2006 and 2014, indicative of payroll stagnation and the effects of the recession, not just here in Scranton, but in other places. So the tax that is indexed to income earning remained relatively flat, grew only by 24% in an 8-year period, while expenses will by 2018 grow to 66%. Let's begin to look at employee expenses by category. We'll look at health insurance, pension, other employee expenses, and direct compensation being green. As you could see in the period of time, you see the normal upward trend lines that you would see growing in health insurance, pension, other employee expenses, and direct compensation. Direct compensation kicked up substantially in 2013 as an expense appropriation as part of your overall budget. But pensions have increased as well, significantly. Look at the percentage growth in pensions in that period of time, and that is the single greatest threat to the city's fiscal stability. So what we wanted to do, as we begin some benchmarking, we begin to look at personnel expenses by department. Not surprisingly, because the city took action to try to control its expenses in the period of time of 2008 through 2013, the city clearly took some steps, and you see everything other than police and fire remaining relatively level, some small movement. Yet you see tremendous increase in police and fire without significant changes in the size of the deployment. Very much of that taking place in simply contract maturation, longevity, and contract negotiations. So what we wanted to do is take a look at, let's start breaking it down per 10,000 residents. We use 10,000 residents as a benchmark in measuring to try to create comparisons. No comparison to peer cities are perfect. There are so many different variables. So these need to be looked at in that context. There's a fair amount of data behind it. And why we use 10,000 residents as a measure? We do other adjustments. But just on uniformed police and fire per 10,000 residents, we see Scranton is not an outlier. In fact, we see from a personnel point of view that police and fire are not far off your peers, police being in the darker blue, fire being in the lighter blue. Fire being a little bit more than some of your peer cities, Lancaster being the biggest percentage difference, as well as Harrisburg, but not an outlier. So from this slide, we would conclude that the number of persons employed in those departments is near appropriate. There's always some room for tightening, always some room for efficiencies, but we don't see the number as being a significant issue, particularly given your contractual obligation to staff, the size of the city, the demographics of the city. City, as you know better than I, is 26 square miles, 7 of which or so are a national park. But there's a number of choke points. There's a number of different communities. It's spread out pretty wide between valley and hill and river. So we see this as a relatively normal number, particularly as we benchmark it of what we consider to be peer cities. When we take a look at police and fire personnel salary and benefits per 10,000 restaurants, not staffing, salary and benefits, we see Scranton, particularly in the area of fire, begins to stand out a bit. So Scranton and Reading have clear similarity in the cost, and you see a police and fire near equivalency in benefits. And that, I believe, is because in 1986, the city negotiated with both fire and union a Me Too clause, what's called a parity clause, that's existed since 1986. You would not see that, for example, in a place like Lancaster or Harrisburg, where you see the personnel benefits differing dramatically based upon historical contract information. When we talk about history, I'm looking back pretty much 25 years, because those are the folks who are hitting the pension and driving the cost. It's based upon those cumulative years of contracts. So we do see the cost of benefits per 10,000 particularly high for fire, slightly high for police, perhaps, but not so high when compared to Harrisburg, Lancaster, Wilkes-Barre, Reading. At the same time, you enjoy excellent service from your uniformed personnel, and the city has, as you know, some different statistics, beneficial statistics, as it relates both to fire and crime. Now, we start to begin looking at, because we always want to know what's driving these higher costs in pension benefits, we begin to look at the percentage of high-ranking personnel in total uniform of police and fire, and we see Scranton really accelerates here. What this tells us is that Scranton is top-heavy, that Scranton has a number of higher-ranked individuals. Higher rank, higher salary, higher pension costs. Now, there are appropriate explanations for this. These are not pejoratives. These are appropriate explanations for this that have to do with changing and shifting after you had a certain pyramid table of organization that has since changed. So in time, that will work out. But we just have to understand our baselines of which we're working with. These are not things that can easily be changed on a current basis, because they are contractual in nature and they represent, as I've mentioned to you before, a 25-year history or so. It will address one of our recommendations that we'll be making in a while relative to the CBUs that I'll talk to you about in a few moments. So now I begin to look at pension costs per 10,000. What's the city of Scranton really paying for pension costs? So not surprisingly, the summation of saying you're probably nearly properly staffed, but it's an expensive staffing model, and you have relatively high ranking in some areas, including a parity provision. It then isn't a surprise, this being your history for 25, 30 years or so, that at a higher workforce 10, 15 years ago, clearly Scranton has taken its workforce down, your pension cost per 10,000 residents is higher than all your peers by a significant delta. And this begins to explain to us why we have to come up with strategies to deal with our pension obligation. And this explains to some extent why Scranton today has amongst the states, if not the state's, most severely distressed pension.
Question. As if we look back to the other sheet where it says that top-heavy in officer, or what is it, top-heavy in personnel, highly paid personnel, or whatever the thing is. Can we assume that as these people retire, those pension costs will even accelerate?
Well, so two things happen. It's a great question. As they retire, you lose that ranking, but yes, we took a look at your eligible employees over the next 5 years, and I think it's 35 or 40% of your employee population is eligible for retirement, particularly at those higher ranks, putting additional pressure on your pension payments. So you actually have a headwind on pension obligation. So the table of organization will fix, but the cost vis-a-vis pension will grow. And I'll address some of that in just a few moments as well, but that's absolutely right analysis. So let's take a look at what this, let's put some of this stuff into, let's take a look at between 2006 and 2014, your pension appropriation, the portion of the budget spent on pension grew by 153%. By 2016, which is projected to be the next significant increase in the city's minimum monthly obligation, it will have grown by 209%. Payments in 2014 account for 14% of your total budget appropriation. If something isn't done, this worsens. This, by the way, is up from nearly 9% in 2006. So we have to develop a solution for this problem because the trajectory is unsustainable. Now, if we take a look at if we put this into a 2006 versus 2018, our model runs out to 2018, you'll see pretty much what's happening. Because of attrition, because of decisions made by the city previously, direct compensation will actually shrink as a portion of your total appropriation. In 2006, 37% of your total budget was spent on employee expenses, in direct compensation. 2018 will be down to 33%. But now pension will grow from 9 to 16%. That's alarming.
That is a barrier to any credit market. That is a barrier to borrowing, and we're going to talk about the need to restructure debt shortly. Healthcare remains at a 20% constant. We believe there's tremendous opportunity to reduce and improve upon healthcare in a combination of modification of some of the contractual issues, but moreover in things that you as a city can do, notwithstanding the contractual issues, because you benefit from such a community of rich healthcare providers, unusual in many of the cities that we deal with. Some of the first-class, best, and highest quality healthcare that a region might experience. And we also see debt growing from 10% to 16% of your budget, alarming, a barrier to the credit markets. So we need to come up with a strategy that fixes debt as a percentage of total expenditures in 2018, and we need to come up with a strategy that fixes pension as a percentage of total debt. And we need to grow all other, which has shrunk, as you could see, from 24 to 15%, in large part because those are other city services that are very important that City of Scranton is now not deploying. You are right now locked out of developing capital for much needed infrastructure expense. Much of your debt is non-productive debt. It's not debt that was aimed at investing in your property and your asset base. For example, you took the equity in your house to pay your credit cards off, as opposed to taking equity in your house to improve the kitchen, put an addition on. This is typical, but was aggravated in part. This is throughout the Northeast. This is not unique to Scranton, and has been aggravated in part by the effects of the recession and continued job stagflation and income and wage stagflation.
Could you make the assumption then that if this continues, since all other is decreasing, that city operations and services that we provide to the citizens will continue to, or will decrease to a point where...
We'll continue to compress. Delivery of health-related services, delivery of collection issues, things that service a municipal budget will continually be deeply stressed. You already have a very understaffed administrative unit, which we take into consideration in some of our modeling. It just makes it harder for the city's apparatus to function well. The biggest threat, however, is the inability to form capital. So you'll just find equipment aging, fully depreciated, non-deployable in some cases. It's a bad cycle to be in. We have to get back to healthy, productive debt. So when we look at the minimum municipal obligation, your MMO, your pension payment, the graph really tells us a lot of what's going to happen. Now let me caveat the 2015 to 2018 jump a little bit. There is a chance that that will not be as severe as I'm modeling. But I do want to explain to you why I model what I consider to be a more conservative model. Markets have been moving well, and pensions have been making some significant progress, given performance in the market. But we know that markets are cyclical at best, and that we have to look at very long-term expectation on performance. So long-term expectation on performance might be an 8% return, 7.5% return, with as high as a 3% cost of living factor, an inflation index, yielding a 4.5 or 5% pure growth. If I extrapolate what's happened to your pension increases just in the last cycle, this is how we are coming up with our model. So we're coming up with a somewhat more conservative model. But we think that's in your best interest because we don't think the minimum municipal obligation is where you ought to be. We think you got to get out of that model. So we took the more conservative approach, notwithstanding that your 2016 MMO might vary. We are hopeful that we'll have an opportunity to meet with the pension actuarial. Your business administrator is arranging for us to do that. We delayed it because there wouldn't have been a meaningful meeting since the new numbers are really just coming out in June. So post-June, sometime July or August or thereabouts, we'll have an opportunity to get a better handle on what's going to happen with where they predict your future going, but moreover, where they think recommendations can be made to change your pension, contractual pension obligations on a going forward basis. Let's take a look at the next slide. So 2007 is dark blue, light blue is 2009, the brighter green is 2011. And when we look at police, we can see what's happened just from 2007 to 2011 in the percentage of assets to liabilities in the city's pension funds. So police, even in 2007, were at 67%. They're now at 39. They're now at 50%. On an aggregate, police were on 57% all years put in place. Fire has seen substantial reduction in the percentage of assets to liabilities. So the last graph is your cumulative, and you'll see that you are only funded at 34% of assets to liabilities in your pension. This is severely distressed. This makes you, in my opinion, and not my opinion, I think others have told me, you're the most distressed in Pennsylvania at this point. In part, as you'll soon hear, because other cities have taken some steps similar to what I will recommend to address their pension issues. Yours is the outlier in part because steps need to be taken to address it. So now I look at the funded ratios of your peer cities. The lower the graph, the worse it is. The higher the graph, the best it is. Harrisburg has gone through a restructuring. You will see that the restructuring has improved their ratios significantly. You'll see Wilkes-Barre, significant improvement in its ratios. Interestingly, however, you have only Harrisburg and Wilkes-Barre exceeding, at least Fire and Reading, exceeding the 80% threshold, which pension actuarials generally indicate as an area where you enter, it's called a red zone. So Scranton is far below where it needs to be. Scranton, over its next several years, a decade perhaps, needs to move its funding ratios to somewhere between that 80 and 100%. And you're going to have headwinds, as I said, because during that period of time, you will be confronting significant retirements. Okay, so now we get to some of our strategy section, the type of thing that where we think we have solutions to recommend to you to consider. I want to explain the philosophy of our solutions. This is a revenue-weighted plan as opposed to an expense reduction plan. Not because we don't like expense reduction plans, you just don't have a lot of room for expense reductions because of your contractual situations, because of statutory limitations, because of the need to provide some minimum level of services. So there isn't a switch that fixes it quick. It doesn't mean, however, that you can't control your expenses over the near, medium, and long term while the revenues can track and improve your ratios. So necessarily, this becomes a revenue-driven plan. Whenever you have a revenue-driven plan in government, you are talking necessarily in the terms of taxes. Whenever you talk in the terms of taxes, you have to be very careful as not to create cycles which are downward or disproportionately create barriers for any one sector. So to this extent, we've spent a lot of time in our work here and in other cities, as well, though, particularly here in this region, examining what we would consider to be certain tipping points. We know that there will not be happy stakeholders, particularly when you talk about revenue-raising taxes. But we come up with a plan that creates some level of mutual dependency, spreading as much as we can over the largest base we can to minimize the actual increase that anyone suffers. We say this, however, fully realizing that revenue-driven plans have serious problems, and they create serious stakeholder issues. It's for this reason, and among other reasons, that we will be recommending in our plan, as you will read, that the administration call upon the bargaining units to not wait until 2017 to negotiate their new contract, but actually open their contract presently, reopen their contract, to talk about the steps and pay grades for new hires, to talk about pension modification, to talk about healthcare modification that is more reflective of peer cities and more particularly reflective of the economic times we find ourselves in. We think it's an important component to understand that in the context of this full plan, we believe that the bargaining units need to open now and not wait until 2017 to renegotiate their contracts, because we believe Scranton needs by 2018 clarity in its budget so it can get back to the business of properly recruiting business in an environment that is clear, that is transparent and unambiguous, as opposed to one that is cloudy and uncertain relative to its budget. So in that context, much thought has gone into how we structure our revenue-raising strategy. We are going to suggest in dealing with the pensions, first, that the city superfund. The only way that the city can superfund is monetizing an asset. The only asset of means that you can superfund is the Scranton Sewer Authority, of which there is or isn't control. It's a political dynamic, but we hope policy and logic prevails on people's good judgment. That transaction would take the course of one or two directions. It could be an outright monetization, a simple sale of the sewer authority, in all likelihood to another public. Law prohibits an RFP limiting exclusively to public and excluding private, but the reality is private can't compete in any of these offerings because they can't become rateable. So these end up being public sales. There have been a number in your region in particular where these sales have taken place. This is part of regionalization. It's a type of regionalization that is important. We would then recommend that whatever the asset distribution is to Scranton, and obviously there's an asset distribution, a monetization distribution to Dunmore, but whatever comes to Scranton be put immediately into the pension. And I'll explain some of the reasons for that in a few moments. One, well, I'll explain it now. One, it reduces to some extent what your pension obligation might be, as some of our other ideas track. But two, it puts a bulk of money to work at a time when most economists see an improving economy over the next several years. So you're putting a bulk of money to work now into the pension, which is going to earn better returns than simply parsing it out on a year-by-year basis. Secondly, and it leads into our recommendation of a non-resident Act 205 tax. An Act 205 tax is a statutorily created legislative tax. It exists today. You have the authority, in our opinion, but we defer to council to enact it. We think you can enact it as soon as you'd like to enact it. The politics I leave to others. But we see no barrier to enacting it, and we urgently recommend that you do. The Act 205 tax taxes non-residents, and we are proposing that they be taxed at 3/4 of a point. This will bring in $5.1 million. Our plan must be based on knowables. So we know you can raise property taxes, we know you can raise EIT, and we are confident that you can raise a non-resident tax. Doesn't mean it won't get challenged, but we believe you meet all the parameters. Interestingly enough, 40 municipalities have this tax in place, and this is a dedicated pension tax. It explains why some other distressed cities have pensions in better condition than yours, because they've already put in some form of Act 205 tax. It's a direct pension tax. That tax can only exist as long as your pension remains distressed and in certain ratios. You currently meet those ratios. So by putting whatever the sewer monetization might be, if you end up going that route, and I'll come back to the alternative in a second, whatever you put in there, you are moving to better funding ratios. So the tax can only exist until such time that you achieve these ratios. This allows for a form of superfunding. This gets you beyond the MMO, and this gets you to a point where you could begin to gain traction and create better ratios in your pension, and at the same time reduce that portion of your appropriation from 15% back down to 9%.
Does our classification as a 2A city present a problem in
It doesn't
instituting
today,
this?
but it doesn't mean the legislature might not want to change things on a going forward basis. I'm going to get to that now, yes. So now, So that would be a monetization. That explains the monetization of why we want to put it into the we want a super fund, because there will be we're proposing a 205 tax, but obviously statutorily it must go to the pension and exist until such time that your ratios come true again. If you cannot, or if the sewer authority chooses not to do a public-to-public bid, our recommendation is going to be that they look at a long-term management contract of water and sewer. We see this in a number of cities where one of the large companies comes in, takes a look at your long-term picture. They enter into a contract with the sewer authority or with the city directly. It's possible that the sewer authority could also dissolve and come back to the city, and the city might enter into a long-term management contract. And those managers will do three things. They will take the amount of money you need up front, and they will calculate the amount of money you need up front and tie it to the longevity of the contract. They will predict your rates on a long-term basis, so you will have rate clarity, and they will calculate the amount of investment needed in creating that long-term rate clarity for investment for compliance. And most northeastern cities have major compliance issues and mandates around stormwater runoff. So that too would factor into this Act 205 tax, to the extent that we'd be still, even if you went that route, putting money into the pension fund to get your ratios right. Now, at a 3/4% 205 tax, a non-resident earning $50,000, which we see better than the region mean, a non-resident earning $50,000 is looking at paying an annual tax of $375. That annual tax of $375 for non-residents and a $50,000 mean generates for the city nearly $5+ million. Again, our concept of minimizing the tax and spreading it on a wider base, and a tax which statutorily must sunset when you reach those funding ratios. And to help explain how you might reach those funding ratios, our recommendation that there be a monetization event, either public sale or private management of the sewer authority. The third leg of that stool is, of course, because we have to bend that trend line going forward, particularly for new hires. As stewards of the city's budget, you're looking at those folks 20 and 25 years out. Again, that will be coming into new hires. And it's with them, in large part, that we would like to speak with the union, should there be an ability to reopen, and talk in terms of change of eligibility around age, calculation of benefits, contribution. Some of this might require legislative support. There's not a state not speaking about it. We just maybe haven't reached the tipping point yet, but also moving to a hybrid defined benefit contribution structure. We see this in some states, we see this in some cities, we see elements, for example, of one of the most severely underfunded pensions in the country, New Jersey, moving to such a hybrid model in certain circumstances. This might require, however, legislative support. So let's take a look again at what we're trying to do with the pension strategy. In our pension strategy, you were at 9% total appropriation. We want to raise money through a monetization event, through an Act 205 tax, and through renegotiating long-term trend to take that 16% portion of 2018, bring it back to 9%, and make it more than the MMO, make it more than the minimum obligation, so you achieve those funding ratios that bring you into a safety zone. Now let's move from the pension strategy to the debt service strategy. When we take a look at debt, as soon as the slide responds, apparently the projector doesn't want us to look at debt. Can you move it manually?
I will make note that the copies that we received end at this point.
Oh, interesting.
As the projector doesn't work.
As has the
neither
projector.
do our-
See if you can get up there and move it, though. Okay. While Evan's reloading that, I'll just begin to speak to you a little bit about the debt and explain the debt situation to you. Over the past several years, again, I come back to 2006. 2006 for us, we think, is a good starting point as benchmarks, because we think it's where we see you as having been relatively healthy by way of budget. So when we see what's happened to the debt from 2006, again, the region, the state, the country hit a relatively severe recession, and the city began borrowing, and borrowing in such a way that it would cover deficit funding. This was to some extent a necessary element. It exists almost nowhere where we do work, because these situations hit you quick, and short of draconianly raising taxes, you try to do a refinancing of sorts to manage that debt in the belief that you'll be able to structure your way out of that particular problem. So Scranton has run into the problem since 07-08 of taking on additional non-productive debt to fund these issues. One major piece of this particular debt problem is your parking authority. And we're going to explain our thoughts on the parking authority as we walk through this. So look in 2006, and in 2006, you will see that debt was $6 million. In 2018, without intervention, just running out what we currently have, brings it up north of $14 million. This is a serious issue. That light blue is the parking authority. Good. I don't think this thing wants to work. There you go. So now when we look at our parking authority, what we did is we ran an exercise, and we said, let's look at what in 2012 was support for the parking authority debt, and let's look at what it really is in 2014. And in the top, you see that deeper orange. You see the city's portion growing dramatically and posing great threat to the city's finances. So even if we took the meter revenue, the parking tax, parking tickets, Scranton Parking Authority's portion of the payment, and we put it all together, we're still short of covering the deficit. It remains a burden to the city. To that end, we recommend immediately moving towards the monetization and sale of the parking authority. Now, we have no great number to work. Nothing's going to be cleaner and clearer than the market. But we know you can't maintain what you have. We know it needs capital investment that you don't have. We know it's running a deficit for the city presently. We know it's a barrier to debt restructuring and debt finance. And we know you are in a disruptive market, that there isn't sufficient demand to allow price stability. Pricing in the Scranton Parking Authority is premised mostly based upon need to meet revenue expectations, not necessarily what's driven by the market. So it will find itself priced out of the market if it is already pricing itself out of the market, because you have a supply and demand issue. So we believe in the monetization of the parking authority, the dissolution and monetization of the parking authority, and we have used $22 million as our placeholder in determining what we think you might sell for, though we have no great number. Our best number is what we think we're basing upon the last assessed appraisal of that debt.
May I?
Just reshuffle the batteries.
When you talk about monetization of the parking authority, are you including metered parking in that monetization?
No, sir.
Okay.
We're talking about just selling the asset.
Just the assets.
Just
Thank
selling
you.
the asset. And we'll address that. So what we want to do is something that credit markets really don't like a whole lot. But they like it if it's moving towards a plan, if it's a narrative. And this is an area, where your BA has particular expertise, where Dave has particular expertise in understanding debt structure, and what municipal investors take a look at. So we use, as a placeholder right now, a $22 million sale. It may be better than that. It may be a little bit less than that. But we're using that placeholder based upon an appraisal that the city last had done, and it's a number we're talking with the bondholders, the bond insurers about right now. So what really happens here is if we take that 31 million residual debt, because now once you sell the parking authority, you have if it sells for 22 million, you have 31 million left over. But that debt, believe it or not, is pretty good debt. It's got a pretty good rate. But you're going to be violating the covenants of the bond when you sell the collateral and, in essence, be in a default situation. So we would like an opportunity to speak with the bondholders, perhaps, about allowing us to work this 31 million out, keep it in place by pledging meter revenue as a source of revenue collateral against it, to see if we can keep that very attractive rate. If, however, we can't keep that very attractive rate, or if we can't negotiate it in a way that makes sense in the total debt picture, we want to take a look at the $22 million judgment you have at the union, currently no principal defeasing, but costing you 6% per year and in your 2014 budget, and look at an initial $5 million payment to get to the unions as part of our desire to try to fix this problem and enter into meaningful good faith negotiations on reopening the contract. But it doesn't change the gross amount of the judgment that you need to refinance. So you would be refinancing the 31 million residual debt, the $22 million judgment, whether it's in the 5 and 17 package or not, and we would like to take a look at your 2003 Series B, C, D debt that might occur in 2015. 2015 is a pivotal year for the city of Scranton as it comes to debt restructuring for a whole host of reasons. One, we think if the plan's adopted and executed, you will have moved aggressively to reestablish fiscal integrity with revenue decision-making, particularly if the unions reopen and negotiate and bring about clarity. You will have a narrative to the credit markets, those are the investors, not necessarily the credit agencies, that would make them much more comfortable at lending into the city at rates better than you're currently getting. Right now, you are distressed debt and paying penal rates. By creating a new debt will be near impossible to achieve. So by taking these decisions, 2015 becomes a year in which you can potentially refinance much of your debt at advantageous rates.
Is this restructuring something that could take place over I'll say a short time as opposed to a 2 or 3 year period?
Yes, sir. This would be a single event. So if we were not able to negotiate with the bondholders on the 31 million, and we think we can make a compelling argument why your meter revenue should, the city's undertaking, the city's making good on its promise. You've raised revenue to be good on your promise. This would be a single event refinancing done through the direction and participation of your financial advisor, along with bond counsel and your business administrator. And what it would allow us to do is then recalculate your debt payments going out, because remember, our goal is to reduce the percentage of your budget that's occupying debt payments so we could restore some of those other services. We also think it gives us an opportunity to talk to alternative lenders, lenders who are happy to lend into distressed environments, notwithstanding what credit agencies say, because they have confidence in the plan put in place. We're in a market today where 5 or 5.5% tax-free is a good rate of return for large investors. It's an opportunity for people to put pent-up dollars into a credit that they have confidence in, recognizing that the credit agencies are going to lag the recovery plan. And these alternative investors we have seen in other areas where we've been working. I think it's fair to say we have sensitized some conversation with these lenders already. In part of our due diligence, we have tried to measure an appetite, and we feel comfortable that this recommendation would be met with success.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had confidence that these investors were out there.
I do believe they're out there, and I think we're in a time where, you know, right now, there's some upward pressure on long-term rates. We still are in a very low-rate environment, but at some point, that's got to give to some extent. And that's why I think 15 is critical, so you take advantage of the economic position we're in today. And in a few minutes, when I show you the model, it'll explain why we're trying to build a surplus in 2015, because it has to do with the ability to refinance this debt in a non-tax environment.
Thank you.
So now, when we look at potential savings costs from restructuring some of this debt and repositioning some of this debt, this was without improving on interest rates. These are some constants. This is without improving on some other things that can happen in our plan. We just don't know until we monetize the parking authority what will really happen there, what the real debt number might be. We are looking at a constant just with the plan that we know, what we know we can do, of $1,450,000 a year savings in your existing budget on a current basis. We believe that can improve even more so, but we wanted to be somewhat conservative in our estimates. So now, we know that the city is going to face increasingly large deficits in 2015, 16, and 17 if no action is taken. The time for decision is here. You don't have a choice unless the choice is to march the city either into the appointment of a receiver or potentially the possibility of a bankruptcy. We think the bankruptcy threshold, the Chapter 9 threshold, is a really high threshold to meet in Pennsylvania and nationally. As I mentioned to some folks earlier, Evan and I, our team is working on preparing an article that will come out probably sometime in 2016. We've looked at every municipal bankruptcy in the history of the country, and we think that there's some real barriers in Scranton to achieving a Chapter 9. Not impossible, but you would need further deterioration. Before you have further deterioration, there's a likelihood a receiver could be appointed because there are things that can be done to fix your situation. So we do think you have opportunity, and we realize and recognize that the opportunity is difficult. Yeah, we think that the receiver would simply take some element of Pell and our plan, assemble them, they're pretty close, and just simply say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to make it work. So obviously we said we want to raise pension dollars through an Act 205 tax. We've talked about raising taxes. We're going to talk some more about raising taxes in a few moments. We know that we want the unions to give us something on that longer-term curve, but we have, in our own studies and our own conversations, found the business privilege and mercantile tax to be a particularly business-unfriendly tax. And let's face it, increased property taxes, increased non-resident Act 205 tax, an already high EIT tax, you need to give some relief to the business community, or you begin creating what we think are some of the tipping points. And we have found this tax in particular, it doesn't even generate all that much money, but we find it painful to people for whatever reason. We find it to be a real barrier. It's viewed everywhere as particularly business unfriendly, in part because it's not always so clear as to what's being taxed and how it's narrated. So our plan, if executed, calls for the elimination of this tax over the next 3 years in its entirety. And we have created sufficient revenue stream to replace it. So now when we look at the table, this table is a summary of our basic approach. We recognize that we're predicting to some extent to the future. We believe we've been somewhat conservative, and we think there's opportunity for improvement. So this is the part where we summarize how we get everybody a little bit mad at us. But it's getting everybody a little bit mad at us, not getting any particular group very mad at us, because we think that creates tipping points. So we propose in 2015 an 18% tax increase on property values. We propose in 2016 a 6% increase. We propose in 2017 a 4% increase. We think thereafter you are simply at a cost of living increase. We believe that if this plan executes, if we achieve our restructuring, and if the LST you're about to hear about does get passed by the legislature at some point between now and then, that level of increase in 2017 may not be necessary, and that you would simply be improving taxes at the rate by which your appropriation grows, and hopefully by then we have we have reduced our appropriation expenses through health care management, through attrition, and through proper personnel management. The Act 205 would bring us $5.1 million on a constant basis, and as I said, would ultimately time out when your funding ratios hit where they should hit. The LST that's currently winding its way through the House and Senate, but has met with is in an area of limbo today, so for us it's an unknown, but we believe it's one that the state might get to at some point, would bring in 2014, if enacted, $1.6 million, and fully loaded $4.9 million, roughly $5 million on a going forward basis. If it doesn't happen, we need to accommodate that $5 million, and you'll understand our thinking in 2015 and why it's such a pivotal year in a moment. So if we take our property tax revenue increase, as you can see, we go from 27.9, 28 to 32.9, roughly 33, 34.9 to 36.3, our 205 constant and our LST tax constant, we end up increasing our revenues in 2015 by $13.5 million. We project a deficit in 2015, all things being constant, at $8.6 million. So our model with funding the pension, driving at these ever revenues, including the LST should it happen, brings us to a $4.8 million surplus. That $4.8 million surplus is as close as we can get and probably need to get to cover the LST if it does not happen. If the LST happens, we have created an opportunity to create the surplus, and to be able to create that surplus, our best case scenario in 2015, puts you in a superior position to refinance your debt, and to refinance your debt in an extraordinarily favorable way as it relates to current condition. In 2016, deficit, all things being constant, increased $12.5 million. We only have a $2.5 million surplus, $2.8 million surplus, but we believe we improve upon that $2.8 million surplus through our debt restructuring, which has taken place in 2015, and through some other recommendations, which may be around the CBU negotiations in the event that the 4.9 doesn't yield, and so on into 2017. So really what we need to have happen to cover that $14 million projected deficit that I opened the night with is to generate as much of this revenue front-loaded now to anticipate the LST not happening, and if the LST does happen, particularly in conjunction with some of our other cost-saving ideas in the budget, we think there's an opportunity to avoid the 2017 increase and be simply at pure cost of living. So we recommend for operational improvements the cutting of healthcare costs. We have not baked that into our formula because we think that has to be studied and engaged. We think that's the next step that the city should immediately move into. We recommend to the administration, to the council, that the city appoint a blue ribbon committee of both city personnel, residents and non-residents, as well as other experts, in coming up with a sharing of services model here in the city of Scranton as well as your immediate region. Where might we share services, whether it be around maintenance, stormwater opportunity, or anything else that can create savings? We can't book them, we can't model them, because we don't even have a baseline by which to understand who might be willing to engage in such shared services. We believe you've already started improving upon budgeting best practices, but we do think you need to get to best budget practices, timely audits, actual budgeting, not anticipatory budgeting, as well as creating improvements in your revenue cycle As I said before, your administration office is terribly understaffed, and therefore it makes it difficult to yield what you might otherwise be able to yield on some of your revenue streams, particularly on waste management. We think the city needs to engage in innovative pilots. We have, notwithstanding our desire to, been able to discuss the level of pilots with the not-for-profit community that we would like to, simply because we couldn't get to a baseline of what the budget would be and what their pilot investment might mean. We had to get them to a comfort level to know that they're simply not throwing money away, that folks are serious about raising revenues, containing expenses, and we think that community must, as a matter of being members of Scranton, participate in pilots of the city, if for no other reason than a bridge through 2017, 2018, and we would recommend that they be relative to dedicated projects, particularly those around capital, since Scranton remains, at least in the short term, unable to form meaningful capital investment. We also think the city should take a look at, in conjunction with the sewer authority conversation, the exploration of a new refuse collection stormwater authority. You can create a stormwater management authority, a new authority, perhaps move your Department of Public Works, essentially your refuse collection, into a standalone authority. We recommend exploring this. I'm not prepared to recommend you do it. We recommend exploring it because we're afraid of your ability to collect capital. We also want to be sure that everyone is paying the full cost of garbage collection and there is a meaningful way to collect it. So authorities sometimes have certain benefits that the city apparatus itself might not have. So in a standalone authority, you would be able to create pledgeable revenue that would allow you to raise money on debt that would have revenue pledged, i.e. productive debt, for purposes of investing in more efficient refuse system. Again, I'm not prepared to recommend this, but we believe the city ought to study this. Summary page. So as we review our recommendations for you, I'm going to bring my presentation to conclusion and prepare myself for your questions. Immediately begin the process of initiating the sale of the Scranton Parking Authority in its entirety. Reopen the city contracts with its collective bargaining unit. Focus on negotiating appropriate health care and especially pension reforms, as well as changes to starting salaries, time between steps, ranking standards, and distribution. Determine the need for state legislation to achieve some of that. Third, establish an Act 205 tax at 0.75%, as I said, on a $50,000 salary coming in, roughly $375 a year, to raise that $5.1 million. As it relates to the 205 tax, more than 40 municipalities in Pennsylvania have this tax in place. More than half of the Act 47 municipalities have a non-Act 205, a traditional commuter non-resident earned income tax. Assuming the passage of the Act 47 revisions of tripling the local services tax rate, which would generate $4.9 million, we believe a portion of the revenue ought to be directed towards the debt related to the judgment that you have with the union. Explore the sale or lease or monetization of the Scranton Sewer Authority. We recommend, with the 100% of proceeds going into the pension for superfunding, a property increase of 18%, 6%, and 4% respectively. We want to take the mystery out of what needs to happen. Thoroughly restructure a portion of the city's existing debt, which includes the residual debt of the Scranton Parking Authority and the judgment-related debt of the union. Phase out the city's gross receipt tax by the third year. Initiate a reassessment. We realize it's out of your power, but we think you ought to yell loudly about the need to do this. Appoint a commission of various stakeholders and leaders from both government and outside government to develop a study, an implementation of various shared services. Review the possibility of dissolving the Bureau of Refuse and migrating personnel to a new refuse collection and stormwater runoff authority, depending upon other aspects of the plan that may or may not track. Conduct a thorough review of the city's current assets and make a determination if that owning of that asset is in the city's best interest. What is it that you own? Do you actually own something that has value, or is it necessary to take a look at whether that asset has value and might be deployed somewhere else and should be monetized? That, Mr. President, members of the council, is my report.
I have two questions to start, and I'm sure other council members do. First question that I would have would be with implementation. How would you recommend that this would be implemented?
I would imagine that there's going to be a vetting process, and I don't know that you're going to have a line of people who support it. You're likely to have a line of people who oppose aspects of it. But in opposing aspects of it, we really need to ask what's the alternative. So I do think there needs to be a vetting process that's fair to all the stakeholders. But at some point, we believe this plan should be considered as the recovery plan, and the city ought to modify its Act 47 recovery plan and consider the implementation and acceptance of this plan as part of that process after it's had an opportunity to be vetted and various stakeholders are prepared to pony up, so to speak. We do think, however, that certain steps should be implemented immediately because you have a problem no matter what, particularly Act 205 tax and particularly the sale and monetization of the parking authority.
And thank you for answering the second question that I had concerning the recovery plan and how this fits into the revised recovery plan that we are now under.
In fairness, that's how we understand it, but obviously your counsel, your business administrator, your current involvement with the Pennsylvania Economy League, who, by the way, I'd like to publicly thank for being wonderful partners in sharing of information and whose data is invaluable. But we think they know the process better than we do, but we feel comfortable that if this were to be followed, you would achieve the level of fiscal integrity and sustainability that we think you would, that we think is necessary by your 2018 budget.
Mr. Rogan?
Yes. First, I'd like to start off by thanking you for coming in to present this to council and thanking the mayor and the mayor's entire cabinet for joining us today and the public to hear this presentation. Outside of the taxing issues, the other reforms, I think you may have copied what I've said at council meetings over the last 4 years. So I'm very happy to hear about the sale of the possible sale of the sewer authority, sale of the parking authority. Two items I've been harping on for many years from this podium. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, I just wanted to see if you agreed with where I was coming from on the sale of the SPA, of having the garages, having that revenue go right on the principal. That will also save us on interest, correct? By making that...
Well, all that revenue will go to principal, sir. So what will happen is when you sell the garages, you have $58 million in debt. If you sold 22, my plan, our plan envisions paying down your debt.
Right.
So you're not carrying the whole 58 forward. That's correct.
And that's one point I just wanted to make sure we were thinking the same way, because that's what I've been saying all along, that we're paying basically for every dollar in principal, we're paying 2. You know, we're at 2 to 1 on our payments. And by making that principal payment, that's going to save us a lot of money in interest, just as if a homeowner were able to pay.
And you will see that laid out in the comprehensive plan that the mayor's office will distribute to you. But I should have made that clearer in the presentation. It anticipates paying off the debt.
Great. That's great to hear. And also, the elimination of the business privilege and mercantile tax is something that I strongly support. There are two things that the residents in Scranton are concerned about. They're concerned about keeping their homes, and I'm glad the property tax increases outlined in this plan are much lower than previous presenters have come in when Pell has proposed 100% increases, and very large increases have been proposed in the past. I'm very happy to see that that's a little bit more manageable in this proposal. And the second thing that people in this city need are jobs. And the only way jobs are going to be created is if we give an incentive to employers to come into the city and employ people. And I think the business privilege and mercantile tax is one of the biggest hindrances to get people into the city to create jobs. And unfortunately, we all hear it many times when a new business is starting up. It's in Oliphant, it's in Old Forge, it's in Taylor. We lost a lot of businesses, and elimination of BP and mercantile tax to me seems the way to go to attract those businesses. Also, the pilots, it's something we've talked about for a long time. So I thank you for coming in, and looking forward to voting on a lot of these proposals. So thank you,
sir.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes. One thing that I'm very much interested in is hoping to see this as this process went on. In any budget, you have two sides of the ledger that you have to balance out. How confident are you in the obligations portion of this, of what we're going to owe as you move forward and everything that you detailed?
I think we have great accuracy in what your financial obligations are, because we understand what your contracts are. I don't think they need to be changed. You don't have a whole lot of other variables that need analysis, and it is debt. And by putting a revenue plan in place like this, you will at least take down the predatory type of rates, even if you can get to them, that you might otherwise experience. So we actually think the debt number can be improved upon if this plan tracks, particularly if the Act 47 LST comes in place.
Just on that vein again, I'd just like to retouch. Let's say nothing happens with this plan at all. We anticipated a 2015 tax increase of about 16% in the plan. What would be the real estate tax increase if this plan does not come to fruition?
If you are unable, if you have to rely exclusively on your property taxes to solve what we think is by 2017 a $14 million deficit, you're talking including the 50% you already had, another 70 or 80%. It was just purely property tax.
Okay, I just wanted to get that number out there. The thing that I find most interesting with this plan as we move along is we actually are doing almost a 3-year budget plan as we look at this. We have been very active with the new council and the new administration at getting real numbers for budgeting purposes, either expenses or income. What I like about this plan is we actually sit down and we have 15, 16, and 17 as we're working towards that, a viable plan that it either gets better or worse and allows us to react to that. So I thank you for the hard work that you've done on that. You've gave us a lot to digest in an hour, and we'll go from there, as well as the public. So I do encourage people to take a look at this plan and to start thinking of comments, positive or negative, because it is, to me, and we've been saying this, I've been saying it since I ran for office, that this is the last chance that the city of Scranton has. This plan, or whatever plan, or however, this is our last chance. As you can see by the obligations portion of this, by 2018, we have no other place to go. So I thank you for all your hard work that you've done.
Mr. McGough, I apologize. There was one question I wanted to ask that I forgot. You mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation about reassessment. What can the city do to force the county's hand into a reassessment? Unfortunately, our current county commissioners haven't really done too much to help out the city of Scranton.
I don't know enough about your local law and what your local law may allow. Certainly, you need to start with pretty aggressive advocacy. We think that the plan, you will have received the full report, is a pretty comprehensive statement and rationale for why it needs to be done. I don't know if there's another legal course of action. I would defer to your council and business administrator, because I simply don't know what your legal avenues are.
Thank you, and because it's very striking when you show, and when Pell also showed the increase when our earned income tax as wages increase, you see an increase in the tax. Without a reassessment, the property tax remains stagnant unless the rate is increased. And
correct.
We want to avoid future
That's
rate
correct.
Increases once once everything runs its course. So thank you.
Mr. Gordon? Yes. Thank you. I'd first like to thank Mr. Amoroso for his presentation and welcome Mayor Courtright and his cabinet members to our caucus tonight. You did a lot of work, and Mr. Wexler's right, it's a lot to digest in an hour. I guess my first question is, in light of this final report from Mr. Amoroso, Mayor Courtright, which recommendations do you plan to include in next year's budget proposal?
All the recommendations that Mr. Amoroso put forward is what we plan on recommending.
Okay, so basically this plan moving forward is your plan, is our plan, is...
Yeah, our opinion is this, is if not this, what? I'm open to, if there's parts of this plan that council doesn't agree with and has a better suggestion, I'm certainly open to that.
Right, okay, thank you. Mayor Corey, can you tell us what progress you've made in conversations with the unions and nonprofits?
I'll start with the unions, and I don't want to presume that we've made progress, but we've met with them, and only my impression, I will say my impression, they've been very cooperative, very cooperative. The nonprofits, we haven't reached out to as of yet, as Mr. Amoroso said. We needed to have some kind of plan to show them, because they don't want to give us money that, for lack of a better term, would go into a black hole. So if they know it's going to be for a specific item, say a fire truck or something to that nature, I think they would be acceptable. Just today, William Conboy from the Allied Services presented us with a check for $10,000 to put towards swimming for children at NAOG. And I think that's a great first step. There's a nonprofit coming forward with a $10,000 check today. Will we pursue them? Yes, but now we have something that we could show them and show them that we have a plan, where the money's going to go, what it's going to be used for. And I'm hoping that they'll see that we're serious about trying to get the city straightened out, and they'll be willing to participate.
Right, thank you. And just one last question. What are your priorities in the next 4.5 months leading up to the presentation of your budget to council? Like, what would you list as your most important priorities?
Well, I think number one, as Mr. Ambrose said, I think that the thing we need to do right away is to sell off the parking garages. I think that's one of the first things we need to do. And the implementation, I hope to send legislation to council as soon as possible for the Act 205.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would care to comment? Again, thank you on behalf of council, and I will say on behalf of the citizens of Scranton for tonight's public presentation. I think people have been waiting to see what can be done. And as you said, there are going to be some difficulties, and some stakeholders are going to have some questions about parts of these recommendations. But I think in general, I think we can look at, I think that people were waiting for the plan. And now that we have something that can be implemented and we can point to as something that will help us make progress toward financial stability, I think that I feel optimistic about the city moving forward. And thank you for all of your efforts. In case, since Attorney Schreiber did not have a microphone, the slide presentation that was made this evening by Mr. Amoroso will be available on the city website for public perusal. And again, thank you for everyone for participation, and we'll adjourn the caucus. One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For all those who have passed away in our community during the past week. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wexler?
Here.
Mr. Rogan?
Here.
Mr. Loscom? Mr. Gahn?
Here.
Mr. McGough?
Here. Dispense with the reading of the minutes.
Third order, 3A minutes of the Scranton Police Pension Commission meeting held May 28, 2014.
Are there any comments? If not, received and filed.
3B, The 2013 Combined Audit Report for the Scranton-Lackawanna Health and Welfare Authority received on June 25, 2014.
Are there any comments? If not, received and filed.
3C, Tax Assessor's Report for the hearing date held on June 18, 2014.
Are there any comments? If not, received and filed.
3D, Single Tax Office City Funds Distributed Comparison Report for June 2013, 2014.
Are there any comments? If not, received and filed. Any clerk's notes? Mrs.
Nothing,
Reed?
Mr. McGough?
Thank you. Anything from, announcements from council members? I would just say, just a reminder of the 4th of July celebration on the 4th at 10:30 at Naog Pool. Again, a very nice event, and hopefully it will be well attended. Also, I believe tomorrow evening the Philharmonic is appearing at Courthouse Square. I'm not sure of the start time on that, but every year a great event to begin the 4th of July weekend.
Fourth order, citizens' participation.
Joan Hodowanitz.
Good evening, Council. Joan Hodowanitz, city resident.
Good evening.
I just want to say that I was happy to see that presentation made tonight. Whether you agree with Mr. Amoroso's proposals or not, at least we have something in hand that we can discuss and move on down the road with resolving the city's financial problems. I'm sure a lot of people will have questions and concerns, but at least we're not in limbo, and I think that's a major accomplishment, just getting past that point. And I'm also happy to see that the city's going to place the slides and the accompanying report on the website by tomorrow at noon, so that's wonderful. We'll get to look at it in great detail again. I managed to get a copy of the Composite Pension Board minutes from the meeting that was dated May 28th. I couldn't do it last week because the copier was down. Because I had a question on one of the paragraphs in the report. This is going to be page 2. You probably have all seen this report. And I'm just going to read it. And I thought I could read and write English, but this paragraph loses me. So I'll just read it as it's written. In bold print, it says John O'Shea. John O'Shea apparently is the president of the board, and he represents the police. John O'Shea, ... And then in normal print, Stephanie Eberhardt, comma, she handles Mellon's checks, not for the pension, period. He contacted her a while back because he heard Mellon was making out the checks for the award in 1998 that the police got an extra 10% in their pension, comma. It comes out of the general fund, period. How they got it, he doesn't know, period. He thinks they got a check back, either we got it back or we didn't, or we're paying it out of the pension fund, period. It should be paid from the city's coffers because it was a contractual issue, period. He thought it was straightened out, but he just noticed it now, period. I do not understand that paragraph. Can somebody translate it into English for me?
I can't.
Okay. The reason I mention it is we have a history of problems with accounting in the city. And sometimes there are significant problems, like thinking Mr. Boskoff owed us money from 1998, which he didn't. Be that as it may, I'm wondering, has there been a June composite board meeting, and have these minutes been approved? Because normally, you know, these meetings start out, you know, let's skip the reading of the minutes, you know, we'll accept them as they stand, and that apparently that's how this meeting went from the prior one. Opening the meeting, you should, before you, the minutes of the previous meeting, looking for a motion to accept or deny, motion to accept. You know, and then there's people go on. And this is a red flag. A red flag in the sense we don't know what is being talked about here. It obviously involves money because it references a check. You know, it involves the pension and the city coffers. And, you know, I would, if I can find out when the next pension board meeting or the composite pension board meeting is, I would very much like to go and ask the board members, what are you talking about? Also, I think when the board prepares minutes, they need to be prepared with some attention to detail that they're legible. Okay? I can't believe that this was put out as
Let me
minutes.
just, Mrs. Reed, when is the composite pension board meet?
It's held on the fourth Wednesday of the month at 11 a.m. here in council chambers.
Fourth
Okay,
Wednesday of the
so
month.
I'll be here with bells in my toes and a ring in my nose, okay? But, you know, this kind of language is just unacceptable. This is an important document, and if this is the way we treat these things, no wonder we're all confused and chasing our tails, you know? My goodness, you know, I mean, is this stream of consciousness writing for municipal employees?
Hopefully it's consciousness.
At any rate, I will be there and try to find out what's going on, but it's little things like this, and we just move on down the road like it's unimportant, and it's important. It may be nothing, it may be a red flag. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Odawana. Ozzie Quinn?
Thank you. Good evening. Ozzie Quinn, Hill Neighborhood Association President. Since Monday, I must have interviewed without doubt, over 200 families that are trying to swim free at Naog Park. As you know, there's a fee charge there by the Scranton Municipal Recreation Authority. And those people are angry. There's no doubt about it, okay? And one of the things that they're angry about is that if they go into the pool area with their 6-year-old to watch the little boy or girl swim, they're charged $5, you know? Even if they wear their street clothes, don't go near the water. I mean, that's pathetic. That's really pathetic. And I have the deed for Naog Park right here, and I'm not taking it out of the context, okay? But I want to say, okay? I'm going to read this here. And assigns through the only proper use and behalf of the said party of the second part and its successors, and assigns forever as and for a free public open park forever and for no other use, intent, or purpose whatsoever. How did that recreation authority get in there? Now, they're in there and they're charged fees, and since 2004, they stopped all of those poor kids from swimming up there at Naog. Well, this year they're not stopping them because they're getting free passes, and they're going to be up there every day. They're going to swim, you know, and that started yesterday. Now, I just want to say one thing. How did they get there? These authorities to have that power. They're not elected officials. The zoning board. How did it get the power to let a variance go through 3 weeks ago tonight on a dog leg in a nice neighborhood, okay, where people have invested their homes for 20, 40, 60 years, and they let a variance go through for 18 parking spaces? How does that happen? How does that happen? Because of the fact it's corruption. Now, corruption isn't going to jail. Corruption in the form of bad government is the worst thing that can happen. And you know what, gentlemen? You people are responsible, and previous councils are responsible, because of the fact that you approve every person that's put on a board. You rubber stamp it. You don't look at the credentials. You do not look at the credentials. You have people on that zoning board that shouldn't even be in the room. It's terrible. You have people that make decisions for the taxpayers in the city of Scranton against people swimming in Nail Park when the deed prohibits it. You know why? Because they're able to circumvent it someplace, and the council approves it. You got to stop rubber stamping these appointees. You got to start looking at their backgrounds and see if they have any type of credentials. It's a shame, it's a terrible shame that this is happening, and it's been going on for a long time, and I think the council now can put a stop to it. I just want to say one other thing is the fact that when I leave this podium, when I speak at this podium, if you have to address me, okay? I'll try to answer a question. But when I sit in that seat, okay, and when motions come, and somebody makes a remark, what I said, it's totally wrong, because I cannot rebut that remark. And this has been happening. Every time someone speaks at this podium, they sit down and nobody says anything here up at council. But as soon as motions come and they say, so-and-so, yeah, I rebut and think that guy's crazy and all this thing. You're out of order and all this stuff.
Actually, Mr. Quinn...
Person cannot rebut it.
Actually, Mr. Quinn, the rules of council state that we should not interrupt you unless you ask us a question.
The rules of council, you have many, many times discussed issues with, and I'm not going to get into debate with you, okay? You have discussed this many times with people. Since the year 1800, people have discussed this matter, okay? Back and forth, communication. It's cowardly when somebody sits down there and you make a remark against them.
No, it's not.
Some of them are derogatory. Now, I want you people to go up there to the hill section and look at that site which they approved that variance. Please.
I've been there.
And do you agree with a parking situation there? The cars coming out of that dog leg?
Yes.
You do?
I think that's what the original intent of that space was.
That was a house in there. That was a house in an empty lot where the parking cars are. You didn't even look at it.
I'm up there every day.
Now, you're saying that it was the original intent.
It seemed to be.
There was a house there till last year. Are you serious? Where they're going to park now? See, you have no idea what's going on.
Thank you. Dave Dobson.
Good evening, Dave Dobson, resident of Scranton. All taxes and fees paid. Appreciate those with the money to do the same. Last week I felt I was a little stern, but and it's certainly, you people are caught in a whirlwind. Act 47 EMT tax, once again, that's 1% of a $15,000 a year income. it's 33/100% of 50,000. It's 0.5% of 30,000, and it's 168 thousandths of a percent at 90,000. It's not a winning situation for us. It's not revenue neutral, and there's winners and losers. The income tax will go up in the state to 4.5% under Act 76, and a 7% sales tax on things that you never, ever have paid taxes on before. Now, getting back to parking authority. That's in the library the night that the parking authority testified, and 90% of the problem wasn't Mr. Scopoletti. It was building one garage after another and then handing them out for free, handing the spaces out for free. Andy was up here, Andy Sparaglia, that back then, and he stated that they were giving away $275,000 worth of free parking a year to the Hilton. And then we built the other one, and Molly Brannigan's, and that one on the 100 of North Washington Avenue, next to the renovated building down there, Connell Building. That parking garage that was in there was totally sufficient. There was hardly a crack in the concrete. I remember they threatened to arrest somebody if he went up there again, the person that said that. And now, I didn't have a chance to watch Mr. Amoroso's full. I'm responsible for feeding the troops, and believe me, they need to be fed. If I don't feed them, I'm in trouble. So, the sewer authority. I talked to a river activist and consultant the other day, and I'm sure you all know him. I'll tell you his name if you ask me outside of here. But he said it would be wiser to sell the firstborn of each household into slavery than to liquidate the sewage treatment plant. And that stands true. You will pay double. You'll pay $1,000 a year just for sewer instead of $450 or $500. And now last week, I was standing out talking to a fireman and one of the people that work with ECTV, and a big, huge pickup truck sped by, probably 50 miles an hour. And then our solicitor, I waved to him on a corner, and another one went ripped by, going east on Mulberry Street, right up through the university, at least 45, 50 miles an hour. And he didn't hit any red lights, so he just kept going at that speed. And I think we could make a lot of money on those speeders, because it doesn't matter what you're doing. I mean, you might as well take a gun and shoot at people if you're going to drive like that. And once again, I'd really appreciate if I could get an answer on Steamtown endorsement before the end of the summer here, or the recess. It really would be nice if you sent a letter endorsing them. And well, I was on a trip last week, and they were about 60%. So, you know, that diesel as opposed to steam really kind of hurts the situation. And on the mall loans, it would be lovely to find out whether the loan that Boscov was given when the state was involved is a subordinate loan that might never be collected once again. On collections of these trash fees and stuff, I think there's sufficient room, and there might even be apartment houses. Mr. Hickey, the one solicitor, mentioned that. There may even be apartment houses where 3 and 4 units are paying one trash fee. So it's imperative that we get on this and dig it out, because I can't keep affording to pay for everybody else. Once again, on the 33%, I'll just be a minute, tax exempt property, sue the state, please, in federal court, because this is unjust. We can't keep paying for everybody else. If you took that money that would have came in and added it up, even if you just kept it as a housing tax, you'd have your whole bill. Thank you.
Ron Elman?
Yeah. Hello, Council. You thought you'd switch days and I'd forget to come, didn't you? I say, yeah, I know what you're up to.
They're trying to confuse you.
Oh, well. You know, I know some of you, this room used to be half full anyway of people. It seems like people have lost faith in the council and our representatives in the Harrisburg. It's like I said last week, I support council. I know you're our only resource that the taxpayers have. You know, every time I read about Senator Blake, and I've talked to him outside, you know, I like him, but it seems like he turns things around where the taxpayers are all the bad guys, and Al Boscoff and downtown and the universities are the victims. This city been borrowing money for 75 years to make payroll. That seems like what we're going to be looking forward to. Your children and your grandchildren are going to inherit. It's just getting worse and worse. We don't get nothing for our tax dollar except some good policing and fire department. And the sanitation department I'm happy with. They come and do their job and leave. You know, maybe if, like I said, I'm not picking on Mr. Blake, but maybe if he was surrounded with 4 or 5 of these crime-ridden projects, he might feel a little differently about things in general. Maybe if his house taxes were doubled like most of ours, he might feel different. He needs to come down from that ivory tower onto the streets where people are and see how things, they're not like he's thinking. You know, like I said, he's more worried about downtown. There's money never been spent on neighborhoods all over town. Downtown's had its chance. It's over with. You know, it's not that I wish it. It's just, I was at Boscoff's last weekend. There's just, the place is just deserted. I don't know why, you know. I think our politicians have forgotten who put them in those seats. You know, July 1st, you know, thousands of people, Corbett took away thousands of people's medical. There's people lining their pockets with oil money, and they're taking away thousands of I guess it's the Access card, I'm not real sure, but dental bills and everything are off, they're gone. You know, I believe that we have just infested Harrisburg with a bunch of 4-flushing windbags. Not all, but there's just a bunch that have forgotten about the people of this state, city and county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elman. Anyone else who wishes to address council?
Good evening, Council. Marie Schumacher.
Good evening.
I have to start tonight by thanking the A-team of the DPW. I have been blessed, I guess we would say, with 3 storm drains on my adjoining my property, and one of them was sinking, shall we say, and then it developed a big hole, and somebody must have reported it because a couple days ago a horse appeared on that, and then yesterday they arrived and found that it was only supported on 3 sides. This was part of the East Mountain Road project, and they had to dig it out and they had to put the 4th side so it would be properly supported. They poured the concrete yesterday, they came back today and finished the job. Other than the setting of the asphalt, they did a fantastic job. They cleaned up, and I salute them. But, there's a but, not anything to do with the DPW's A-team, but the fact that the job wasn't done correctly first. I don't know why we continue to pay people the second time when, I don't know how we write our contracts. That should have still been, I mean, that's not even 10 years old. It was done improperly. It should have been done by the contractor for free. The same thing with the police headquarters. Those sidewalks down at the police headquarters started crumbling very early on. It's 2005. That's not even 10 years. Should have gone back to the contractor and said, do the job correctly. And we've got to start watching that. We're wasting a lot of money doing things over the second time. Second, tonight on seventh order, do we have a definition for what educational parking is? And whether that the annual license fee is $1, instead of being $1 per space, is a flat fee of 50, whether you have 5 parking spaces or 500?
I'll answer the first one. Educational parking is an expansion on student parking, and educational parking applies to students, faculty, staff who park at an educational institution.
Even if they pay? Even if they're charged? Then I'm against it. Okay, if that's not specified, that if it's provided for free, okay, if they are, I'm against it. And then the second one?
To my knowledge, it is, was it $1 per space, or?
It being changed from $1 a space to a flat $50 fee
I thought it
annually.
was up to a $50 fee.
It's not what it says here. It says annual license at a fee of $1 per space to a flat fee of $50 per year. So, again, maybe you could hold that one for another week, because I don't think that's too fair either. I do have comments on 5D, but there's time next week. And 7D, I spoke my piece last week. I don't think we need to go backwards on that park. And then, Mr. Gahn, did you and Pat Rogan work out who's going to respond to the questions that I asked last week, and I sent copies before I went to bed last Thursday night on
Since
my
that's
questions?
Well, that's Mr. Rogan's committee, so I don't know if he got to those questions or.
Do you
saw
have the
email,
answers
but-
tonight that you'll be sharing during motions?
I didn't receive an email. I do have an answer for the one from 2 weeks previous regarding the park, but I didn't receive an email. And mine
It
is,
didn't-
my
it didn't-
email is not the city email, it's.
It didn't kick back. Well, then you need to provide it, because that's
It's
where
on,
I...
it's on the city's website.
I sent it, well, that's what I sent to the city.
No, it's patrogan1@gmail.com. My city email was filled with spam, so I switched, this is about a year ago, to a Gmail.
Do it again. Is it case sensitive? Is it
No,
Pat Rogan?
Pat Rogan, the number 1.
Number 1?
At
Number sign
gmail.com.
1 or just 1?
The
Numbers
1,
at...
at gmail.com.
I'll resend it, but essentially what I've asked for is, of the roughly $1.7 million that we had loaned out in the loans that were in litigation when you gave the report back in, I believe it was March of last year, how much of that has been collected, how much has been written off, and then how much of the category of current on their loans as of March last year. What is the status of those now? Are they all current? Have any defaulted?
Sure, yeah.
And so I would definitely like that next week.
If you could email that to me, I'll get that to Ms. Abley. And on the other question that was in here last week regarding the park, I know you asked questions regarding the park on the 500 of Lackawanna. In March of 2014, the finding of facts, the decision was issued by the Board of Claims, and I think that was reported in the paper. Following that point, on June 2nd, Sardoni Construction appealed the decision, and PennDOT filed a petition for review on April 14th, so it looks like the litigation will continue.
Of this year?
Of 14.
Okay, and then just one more quick, it'll be a yes or no. Has the IT software that the state was buying for us been installed, and is it being utilized? And if not, when will it be? Anybody know that?
I'm sorry.
The IT software that the state was buying for us, has that been installed, and is it operational, or is it yet to come? And if it's yet to come, when will it be operational?
I thought that they were in the process of replacing the computers at police station, and that they were upgrading here. I'm not sure at what stage that is, to be honest.
No, this is just software for the operations of the city that the state was buying for us.
But I think
Okay,
it was
maybe.
all part of a kind of a same plan, so I'm not sure at what stage they're at.
Okay, maybe you could get that for next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who cares to address council?
Fifth order, 5A motions.
Mr. Wexler?
Thank you, Mr. McGough. Tonight we had quite a lengthy presentation by Mr. Amoroso concerning the state of the city financially. I was pleased the fact that the entire administration was here and including cabinet members. The city, as discussed, is going to put as much as they can information on the website. What I would suggest, though, at this time is as we move forward, for such an important decision, I would like to see if we could make some arrangements for some type of town meeting that we can get everyone's input on this information. It would be more or less just more of an opinion session. Some people may have some different ideas. As stated before, I've said this a few times, this is the last chance that the city of Scranton has to get its financial house in order and move forward. If we are unsuccessful in getting our act together, our future as a city is in doubt. So I would like to get as much input as possible from the citizens of the city, as much input as possible from other stakeholders. As part of the presentation was putting a small burden on our non-residents. I'd like to get input from them. So I'd like to see as the summer progresses, perhaps we could put together some type of town meeting or hearing. On Monday night, I attended, along with Mr. Gahan and Mr. McGough, we attended the Neighborhood Summit meeting, which once again was well attended by all representatives of the administration. Each of the department heads gave reports on what they're doing in terms of helping the city, and there's a lot of progress being made in terms of improvements in each department of the city. And it was a very, once again, very well attended, and offering was, a lot of good offerings were made. I'd also like to thank the La Festa Committee for their commitment that they've made to the city in refurbishing the Electric City sign. It shows that people are interested in helping our community. And in addition to that, today we just found out that Allied Services has committed $10,000 for free swimming in the city. Mr. Quinn, I know you're there. I will not answer comments during the comment section. That comment section is reserved for you to speak. My comments are reserved for this portion of the meeting. In terms of what you spoke of tonight, many of the appointments made to authorities are made by the mayor, and ours is purely a accession. And you should be aware of that because you served on the board. You were an appointment to the Planning Commission for many years. You served in the capacity. You understand how it works. And
Mr. Quinn, you're out of order.
And in terms of...
No, he's not.
And in terms of what the council does, we started this in January. Before any appointment is made, the council receives a resume from the applicant. And we do not move forward until we receive that resume. So we are doing our homework in terms of checking into people and what their commitment is to the city. Thank you.
Mr. Rogan?
Thank you. I'll also address that issue, and this is for any speaker. If they would like an answer during their comment time, I'd be happy to answer it during that period of time, or if they would like me to wait till motions, I would wait till motions. It doesn't matter to me when I give a response. I know a lot of speakers don't like a response during the comment period because the time is limited. Also, regarding appointments, I've never voted for an appointment that hasn't provided a resume to City Council. This is a practice that started under the previous City Council. It's a practice that we continued to employ. I'm sure there's at least a dozen that I voted against, even people that I knew and liked, just because they wouldn't pay the courtesy to City Council to send us a resume and a letter of interest. So that's how I feel regarding appointments. Back to the hot topic of the night, the report that was presented to us. I'm very happy to see that a lot of other items were put in there besides the tax side. Obviously, the real estate tax increase and the possibility of a commuter tax are items that we're all going to have to think long and hard about. The other items, on the other hand, I think are much more cut and dry, and they're issues that could have been tackled a long time ago. the sale of the parking garages. The city is hemorrhaging money on these garages each and every year, and there's no reason for the city to keep throwing good money after bad with these garages. By selling them, I believe Mr. Amoroso had in his report around a $20 million price tag. By earning that $20 million, it's actually earning 40 for the city, because by using that money to accelerate our debt repayment, we're pretty much saving $1 of interest for every $1 of principal that's paid down. That's a fiscally smart decision. That's something that we need to look to do where we can. Obviously, the debt service in the city is one of the constraints on the budget, along with the pension. They're two of the bigger issues. So by doing that, we cut down on our debt service, and we also rid ourselves of an asset that needs millions of dollars in repairs and that's not producing for the city. I'm glad that Councilman McGough brought up the question regarding the meters. I don't think anyone would support the sale of the meters. They are a true asset of the city, as they bring in over $1 million every year, and that sum keeps growing as we work to enhance the meter program in the city of Scranton. The sale of the sewer authority, it's another item that I support. By selling the sewer authority for, let's use the sum $20 million again, and using that as a lump sum into the pension fund, by doing that, we put that $20 million to work for the city. It could sit in the fund and grow. Historical returns on the conservative end, in Mr. Amoroso's report, are 8% growth per year. When you're growing, when we're growing our 401ks at 8% a year, it's a nice little savings, but it's not a huge amount of money. When you take $20 million and grow that, that's money that every year thereafter we're not going to have to put into that fund, because it's earning money for us. So I also support exploring the sale, the outright liquidation of the sewer authority, which I've supported for all of my 5 years on this board. Breaking out the payments of the arbitration award to the unions. It's another item that I think we should look into. I think the previous administration should have negotiated a payment structure that would have been easier to obtain financing for, and it would have been more palatable to many of the banks to loan us a small portion of those funds instead of the whole amount at once. And we have to keep in mind that although the arbitration award hasn't been on the front burner at public meetings and in the press, that interest is ticking every day. So every day that goes by that the city is enacting on the court award is more money that it's costing the taxpayers. So that issue has to be resolved. On the elimination of the business privilege and mercantile tax, that tax is a nuisance tax. It's a hindrance to businesses in the city of Scranton, and it makes it harder for job-producing companies to move to the city. We could get a lot of good press, and we could have a lot of goodwill with the business community by eliminating those taxes, and that will bring jobs into the city of Scranton. We need to encourage pro-growth policies, such as the elimination of these taxes, to get the city to move forward. Pilots have always been a struggle. I know they weren't talked about too much tonight. One of the things that I would hope the city would explore, and we've seen hopefully the beginning of that with a $10,000 check from Allied for kids to swim, is instead of going from a system where we ask for a check from an institution to go to a system where we ask for a service or funds for a specific project. Maybe we could ask the University of Scranton for additional money for paving, and we could dedicate it specifically to the hill section. Or we could ask Allied Services for funds, and we could dedicate those funds they're donating to us specifically to their area. Because at the end of the day, the city's providing a service to those areas anyways. Any cost savings we could realize through a payment in lieu of taxes is certainly a bonus. Regarding help from the county and the state, unfortunately, the city of Scranton has been left behind when it comes to state help and county help. And I think, what I do like about this plan is it, unlike Pell's previous plans, it doesn't rely upon legislation changing, either through the state or through the county. Pell's plans that have come to us before, it always relied on a maybe. Well, if this passes, then you can pursue this item. This plan seems much more realistic. A couple of the things on the negative side of the plan, obviously, the real estate tax increase and the possibility of revamping a commuter tax. There are issues that I think all of us on council will have to look at long and hard before making a final decision. But I think all of these other items listed previously can help defer, so we have a much smaller increase in those other line items. The only part of the plan that I wish would have been included that wasn't is privatization of the city refuse collection. That's something I've long supported. I think it would save us money in the long run to have it done privately, but that wasn't included in the plan. I hope that council will take action on these items for an up or down vote over the course of the next few months to get everything in place prior to the budget being introduced. That was another past problem where budgets would be introduced with items that still had to be approved in January. So I think by being proactive and voting on some of these items, such as the sale of the parking authority, sewer authority, prior to the budget, will help it make it a lot easier to create a realistic budget at the end of the year. And finally, just two other comments. I agree with Councilman Wexler. I would also support the idea of a town hall meeting to get input from residents. I think it would be great. We could have it here in council chambers. Maybe we could find a night in the month of August, since we aren't meeting, where we could have this maybe an agendaless meeting just to have public input. As you know, I did want to meet throughout the month of August, but I think a town hall style may even be more productive than a regular meeting. So it would be good to have that. And finally, one issue that I brought up briefly 2 weeks ago was the issue of the Cedar residence, the halfway house, the old Penswood Manor. And this issue is more of a zoning issue, but it's a neighborhood issue in South Scranton, where this was shot down by our local zoning board. It was appealed to the state, or to the next level. It was shot down again. Variance was never approved. And right now, a court case is pending at the state level to approve a variance to operate a halfway house at the old Penswood Manor. Unfortunately, while these appeals are processing, the residents can operate. From some of the research I've done, it's entirely legal for them to operate while the appeals are pending. If that isn't bad enough for the neighbors in South Scranton, to make things worse, I learned from some of the neighborhood watch folks in Southside that Lackawanna County is now subsidizing this halfway house. So if my colleagues would agree, I would like to send a letter to the Lackawanna County Commissioners urging them to reconsider subsidizing with any taxpayer dollars a halfway house at Cedar Residence in Southside. Would that be agreeable?
Agreeable by me.
Yes. And Mrs. Reed, I'll send you all that information tomorrow on that letter. And that's all I have for tonight. Thank you. Actually, one more. I always forget one thing. I would like to make a motion to, in Councilman Loscombe's absence, to appoint Councilman Wexler as temporary chair for the Committee on Public Safety.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, and so moved. Mr. Gahn?
Yes, thank you. Just two items. Tonight, we will be introducing legislation regarding permit parking in the 900 block of Prescott Avenue. Next week, on the July 10th meeting, we will have a public hearing concerning this matter at 5:30 here in council chambers. And finally, I received numerous complaints from residents who live on Park Drive near Hilltop Manor in South Scranton. The residents are complaining of various disturbances, including loud noise and fireworks late at night. This has been an ongoing issue for the residents in that area, so council has decided to send a letter to the Housing Authority and Police Chief Graziano, making them aware of those various issues. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I too would like to respond to some comments that were made. The appointment of people to authorities and boards is not a corrupt process. The appointments are vetted by both council and the administration. And the people that serve on these boards, they're citizens and taxpayers in the city of Scranton. We may disagree with them at times, but I believe that they are honest, concerned people with the best interest of the city of Scranton in mind. And I believe that the comments made tonight about the people serving on these authorities and boards was very insulting to the members who do serve. As I said, I believe that these are, good, hardworking citizens in the city of Scranton with the interest of the city. As far as the presentation that was made earlier by Mr. Amoroso, I would just like to comment that many of the recommendations made by Mr. Amoroso are already works in progress. The city has been very proactive in dealing with many of the issues that were presented this evening. I know for a fact that Mr. Balzoni has been working very diligently on many of the recommendations that were made this evening. And the implementation of the program that was presented is something that's already in progress, and hopefully something that we do bring some of these to fruition during the 2014 year, and that they do not carry over to 2015. We need to work quickly on some of these, and I know the city administration feels the same way. One of the things that Mr. Rogan did mention was the meter revenue. And while I've gone back and forth with whether it's advantageous to sell the meter revenue and all, I believe that one of the things that came out of this was that the meter revenue would be dedicated to the payment of any debt that would result from the refunding of or the refinancing of the SPA debt. And again, I think that this is something of that nature, gives greater confidence to the investment community that we are dedicating certain funds to certain issues, and I think that that's a great idea, rather than putting something into the general fund where it can go anywhere. Dedicated debt service, I believe, is a great idea, and as was mentioned again in the recommendations from Mr. Amoroso, there are a number of areas where it's advised to do a dedicated debt service. So happy to see many of the things that were included in the proposal, and we will be carefully looking at and reviewing the proposal and recommendations that were made, and hopefully many of these will come before us for vote before the end of the year. And fifth order.
5B for introduction and ordinance establishing permit parking only in the 900 block of Prescott Avenue on both sides of the street, 901 to 949, 902 to 956, which includes all the residences with the exception of apartments located above commercial properties.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion that item 5B be introduced into its proper committee.
So moved.
Second.
On the question, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, and so moved.
5C for introduction and ordinance creating and establishing special city account number as noted entitled Garrity Park for the receipt and disbursement of grant funds received under grant application.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion that item 5C be introduced into its proper committee.
So moved.
Second.
On the question, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, and so moved.
5D for introduction, a resolution authorizing the mayor and other appropriate city officials to execute and enter into an automated red light enforcement program project agreement, reimbursement agreement number as noted, with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation regarding the addition of a left turn signal head at Washington Avenue, Elm Street, City of Scranton, Lackawanna County.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion that item 5D be introduced into its proper committee.
So moved.
Second.
On the question,
Yes, on the question. Just some additional information on this agenda item. The City of Scranton has applied for and received an automated red light enforcement transportation enhancement grant, and it is necessary for the city to execute and enter into an ARLE reimbursement agreement to receive funds in the amount of $75,000 for the design and construction of the left turn signal head at the intersection of South Washington Avenue and Elm Street in the city's south side. In spite of the addition of a turning lane, a modification to the signal head is required to avoid turning vehicles sitting through several cycles at peak periods. This grant was applied for in 2010 by then City Engineer Brian Swanson, and it was awarded April 25th, 2011, and it is a much-needed project. Thank you.
All those in favor of introduction signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it and so moved.
5E for introduction, a resolution authorizing the Director of the Department of Public Works of the City of Scranton to sign and submit the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation application for traffic signal approval for traffic signal permit number as noted for the modifications of the traffic signal at the intersection Lackawanna Avenue and Steamtown Mall driveway, Mifflin Avenue, in downtown Scranton as part of the construction of the County of Lackawanna Transit System Intermodal Facility.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion that item 5E be introduced into its proper committee.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All those in favor of introduction signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it and so moved.
5F for introduction, a resolution accepting a donation of $3,600 from Amos Towers Management Enterprises Incorporated, presented to the City of Scranton Fire Department for the purpose of toolboxes, including miscellaneous hand tools for 9 of the city's apparatus.
At this time, I'll entertain a motion that item 5F be introduced into its proper committee.
So moved.
Second.
On the question, I will say that I know that this is at least the second year in which the Amos Tower Management Incorporated has offered or given to the fire department a substantial donation, and it's something that they have negotiated with the fire department, something that the fire department felt that they needed, and so I'd like to thank Amos Towers Management Enterprises for their donation to the fire department. All those in favor of introduction signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it and so moved.
Sixth order, 6A, reading by title, file of the Council Number 33, 2014, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and other appropriate officials of the City of Scranton to enter into lease agreements with West Scranton Little League for various Little League, T-ball, Farm League, Teener League, Missy League, baseball, and softball for use of city-owned property in connection with approved Little League, T-ball, Farm League, Teener League, Missy League, baseball, and softball activities for a 3-year period commencing April 15, 2014, and ending April 14, 2017.
You've heard reading by title of item 6A. What is your pleasure?
I move that item 6A pass reading by title.
Second.
On the question, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it and so moved.
Seventh order, 7A, for consideration by the Committee on Finance for adoption, file of the Council Number 30, 2014, amending file of the Council Number 30, 2012, entitled, an ordinance imposing a tax for general revenue purposes on operators of parking spaces at the rate of 15% upon each parking transaction, and establishing annual license procedures and fees, and promulgating the record-keeping and reporting rules and regulations on parking transactions pursuant to the Local Tax Enabling Act 53 PA CSA 6901 et seq. By amending Section 1 definitions, by adding the exemption of educational parking, amending Section 3 annual license, by changing the annual license at a fee of $1 per space to a flat fee of $50 per year, amending Section 5 return and payments by changing monthly to quarterly, and in addition to city, add or the city's designee, and amending Section 6 to add a designee to the overall management of the parking tax.
What is the recommendation of the chair for the Committee on Finance?
As chairperson for the Committee on Finance, I recommend final passage of item 7A.
Second.
On the question, Roll call, please.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mr. Rogan?
Yes.
Mr. Gahn?
Yes.
Mr. McGough?
Yes, I hereby declare item 7A legally and lawfully adopted.
7B for consideration by the Committee on Public Safety for adoption, file of the Council Number 31, 2014, amending file of the Council Number 79, 2012, entitled, "An Ordinance Repealing All Prior Ordinances Regarding Fines to be Imposed for Police and Fire Departments' Responses to False Alarms in the City, Establishing Fines to be Imposed for the Activation of an Alarm Device which is determined to be a false alarm by the Police Department or Fire Department, authorizing the administration and enforcement of said fines, and prescribing penalties for violations of this ordinance by amending certain sections, eliminating a section, renumbering, and adding a new section to provide for a graduated fee structure and to increase collection and payment of said service charges, and to provide for an appeal process.
What is the recommendation of the chair for the Committee on Public Safety?
As temporary chairperson of Committee on Public Safety, I recommend final passage of item 7B.
Second.
On the question, roll call, please.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mr. Rogan?
Yes.
Mr. Gahn?
Yes.
Mr. McGough?
Yes, I hereby declare item 7B legally and lawfully adopted.
7C for consideration by the Committee on Rules for adoption, file of the Council Number 32, 2014, authorizing the mayor and other appropriate officials of the City of Scranton to enter into a lease agreement with West Scranton Little League for use of city-owned property for a one-year period commencing April 15, 2014, and ending April 14, 2015. Per Section 9 of the lease agreement, the Westside Falcons junior football team will enter into a third-party agreement with the West Scranton Little League for use of the Lackawanna Little League field for the months of July through November 2014 as specified in the lease agreement.
As chair for the Committee on Rules, I recommend final passage of item 7C.
Second.
On the question, roll call, please.
Mr. Wexler?
Yes.
Mr. Rogan?
Yes.
Mr. Gahn?
Yes.
Mr. McGough?
Yes, I hereby declare item 7C legally and lawfully adopted.
7D for consideration by the Committee on Finance for adoption, Resolution Number 63, 2014, ratifying and approving the execution and submission of the grant application by the City of Scranton to the County of Lackawanna for Lackawanna County Community Reinvest Program Grant for the improvement project at Fellows Park, and authorizing the mayor and other appropriate city officials to accept the grant, if successful, to execute a grant agreement and accept and disperse the grant funds for the City of Scranton improvement project at Fellows Park.
I'd like to make a motion to table item 7D.
Second.
On the question, 7D is being tabled because there are a number of questions regarding this grant and whether it would be in the best interest of Fellows Park and the community around Fellows Park to enter into this agreement and to make these improvements. City Council will further investigate the nature of the grant and whether we will and what can be done with it. All those in favor of tabling item 7D signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it and so moved. Prior to adjournment, I would like to wish everyone a very happy and safe 4th of July. Please enjoy the 4th of July weekend, but be responsible, and also please be thoughtful of others as you celebrate. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
This meeting is adjourned.